Hey there anime watchers, today I finally released the long-awaited Isekai tier list video that I promised around 30 decades ago. Finally letting you see a snippet of the hottest isekais to come out, and also showering you with some absolute travesties. That brought me to my breaking point, making me question if there was even a god in the first place. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, but every time I read a bad isekai like clockwork, my will to read and write was sucked out of me. So here you go. I'm starting this tier list a little bit controversial. I came into this manga with little expectations and was pleasantly surprised by how decent it turned out to be. Just by looking at the art cover of the first volume, it looks like your typical NTR story that have gone mainstream, like some sick twisted joke, like an April Fool's joke gone wrong. The manga begins with the main character appearing in another world dick swinging butt naked, and by no means is it a masterpiece, but it's goddamn enjoyable to read. The 32-year-old college dropout shooter has no idea how he ended up in another world, let alone butt naked at the feet of a village chieftain, but he is enslaved and forced to work and knows his way around manual labor. Shooter's ready to do whatever it takes to earn his place in the fantasy frontier town. Butt naked had to be placed first on my tier list. With a description like that, how could you fight the urge to not read a manga about a Japanese man swinging both his swords at a dragon or trying to solve other fantasy creatures' problems? Now with all good conscience, I can't place this above the B tier. There are far too many moments when the character's brains just decide to turn off and allow whatever crisis is happening to happen. So just to reiterate, solid B tier. One stormy night, our unlucky protagonist is unfortunately struck down by Thor and is reincarnated into another world. I don't know why he's a younger version of himself. Usually there's some sort of continuity between how he looks and the role that he plays in another world, but I'm just happy he isn't turned into a wimpy teenager. While the former 58-year-old vagabond is reincarnated with the ability to praise things. While he's running around butt naked, he comes across an elf girl that ends up getting lost in the dungeon too. And from then on, they form a mini party until they reach the outside where they find a naked wolf boy that's getting attacked by a werewolf. Homeless in another world is such a complete letdown. It has such an interesting setting, being homeless and using those skills that he has gathered in his past lives in order to survive in a new world. But he doesn't do any of that. There are no makeshift squirrel knives or like long-range fecal weapons. Nothing like a real homeless guy, just another isekai. And this one's just a complete letdown. Stories like these are hard to sit through. The main character is just far too bland and uncreative. F tier. A entire high school suddenly transported to another world as they are attacked by monsters. They find that some of the students now have superpowers. They organize themselves into two groups. Those with superpowers are called the exploration groups, and the ones without superpowers are called the stay home group. One night where most of the exploration group is out, the remaining ones stay behind and start the slaughtering, and forcibly hiding their pork sword inside the people who stayed behind. Here we meet our protagonist, a typical average Japanese guy with no abilities who just barely escaped death at the hands of his classmates. He ends up hiding inside of a cave on the verge of death when suddenly a slime enters the cave and starts eating away at his hand, but instead of killing him, the monster heals him instead. He is eventually able to figure out that he can communicate with the tame monsters, but only with the ones that are female. So he begins to build a harem of monster girls to fight his battles for him. Interesting concept, but the writing is what keeps it down. There's one character that he will meet later who goes on and on about how evil mankind is. There is darkness because mankind attacked the sun, or something stupid, you know, something that an edgy 12-year-old might repeat. But it's said in a vague way that they think it sounds deeper than it really was. And then there's just some scenes that crack me up thinking about them. There's a part where he comes across this bastion of power, a spider girl who has been using the main character's companion as mops, and only when his companions manage to get one lucky shot in, one of the girls, you know, the one that has been on her doom and gloom, starts saying, "You have lost," for the spider girl to be perfectly fine, not even a scratch on her. But they managed to get her to stop, not because she was hurt or wounded or anything like that, because they had a moment where they communicated only using their feelings. C tier. It's fine, it's not something that you get excited over. It's just your typical isekai with some dark elements to it. So yeah. What if Kirito was reincarnated in another world with a t-shirt maker? I just finished reading this one and using my full intellectual prowess, I have come to the conclusion that the creator of this manga should do some shotgun tasting. It felt like this manga was targeting the American demographic, and I'll explain that in a minute. The main character Lute was killed by his bully and was offered a free trip to another world. He's reincarnated as a baby in an orphanage alongside his harem girl number 1. And he thought to himself, well, since I can't use magic, I might as well introduce guns to a world where they're still fighting with sticks and stones. Through trial and error, he was able to create a gun, and luckily for him, at the same time his childhood friend was being attacked by a group of goblins. Testing, I mean using his blicky to save his childhood friend. From then on, it's about making more powerful weapons and going on adventures with his sexy childhood friend who's also a wolf girl who can't wear normal clothing because they are sensitive to heat. Oh, did I forget to mention she was given a death adder too? A Japanese dude that knows about guns dies and is sent to another world where he will build a harem of sexy anime girls to shoot up the Demon King's castle, as if it was an American shooting range. Poor man's version of gay. D tier. My lover was stolen and I was kicked out of the hero's party. With a title like that, you're kinda expecting something nice, hot, and spicy. Something like a crazy NTR story. Now that his lover was taken, he would have to get revenge on the hero's party in order to rescue his lover. But sorry to rain on your parade, that would have been a much more interesting premise. But here in anime land, we don't make sense. When I was reading the manga, you could clearly tell that the mangaka was deeply hurt, because not even a chapter in, the main character is getting treated like a flashlight. Just like in Failure Frame, no one in the universe likes the main character. They just want to see him suffer as much as humanly possible for no other reason than we need to build up quick, cheap, and unearned sympathy for the main character. One night, the main character couldn't sleep, so he tries paying his girlfriend a nightly visit, only for him to stumble into one of his party members, making him wait in line. Like any self-respecting individual, after hearing his girlfriend moan on the other side of the wall, he did the only logical thing and went to sleep. The next day, before he had a chance to confront the hero, he was chained down by a magical trap when they suddenly started monologuing. That they never really liked him, they were only using him as a sacrifice so everybody else in the party could get a power boost in order to defeat the Demon Lord. After the betrayal, they proceeded to teach the protagonist the art of BDSM by tying him to the ground using invisible chains. And the protagonist, being the kind of individual that he is, let a couple of poor starving wolves go to town on him. But while getting munched on, he realized, hey, getting used as a chew toy sucks. A voice came to him saying that they'll give him the power to deal a fixed amount of damage to an opponent, and in his dying breath he accepts, breaking the chains that his former companions placed on him, allowing him to get free and turn the wolves into puppy chow. As you expect, he doesn't die and goes on the typical revenge story against the heroes. If you want something better than this poor man's Uberblatt, or an even slightly more watered down version of Read Over Healer, I highly suggest you just read Uberblatt, which deals with the heroes betraying the protagonist but in a much better way. It somehow worms its way past F tier into D tier. Okay, stay with me.
Even though I absolutely lost women, I got reincarnated as a transfer student into an only girls school.
It's about a guy who hates women. One day he ends up getting asked by a shady government representative if he wants to go to school in another world. And he gladly accepts, wanting to get away from the women in his world. But surprise, surprise, he ends up getting transferred to an all-girl high school in another world. The comedy could be hit or miss. It's a standard overplayed joke. Come on, you know the ones. The ones where the main character enters some kind of room and all the girls are half naked or changing. When she starts hitting the guy. But instead of taking it, he starts swinging back, calling her irrational because she told them to come in. It's okay. The author is trying to make the character's misogyny have some deeper layer to it being rooted in a past trauma, but the author executes it poorly. There's almost nothing to like about the main character, and he is showing growth, but the way that they portray it is wrong. It feels more like a one-punch man from Wish. D tier. The Reincarnated Great Saint hides that she's a saint. It's a revolutionary isekai manga where the mangaka breaks barriers. Yes, you can be excited for this one. It's a isekai where the main character does not have a penis. And I know what you're thinking. He doesn't have a penis? Isn't that 99% of all isekai? Where the main character has an irrational fear of coochie? But no. I mean, it's an actual gamer girl, you know those creatures passed down in legends? Fiorud is a rare, soulless Genki girl of a protagonist. Her introduction begins with her family debating whether or not to let her take the exam that will turn her into a knight. And the only reason why they're debating is because she has no aptitude for swords. Like, she can't use swords, her hands will catch on fire if she even attempts to pick one up. She, in isekai fashion, meets a poor dying black bird. Seeing this poor creature on the ground writhing in pain, she decides to heal it. But oh no, she forgot there's no black birds when they suddenly transform into a black dragon. After chewing her for a good minute, the dragon just decides, hey, I'll be your familiar. You're cool with that, right? Okay, good. You know, one of the most dangerous creatures even the Demon Lord feared was recruited by the main character in 2 chapters. You know, in the isekai fashion, wasting no time to become stronger than the Demon Lord. But for whatever reason, she just decides to hide the fact that she tamed one of the most powerful creatures in that world. Well, in a flashback of her past life, it was revealed that she was left to die by her brother and his party members because they were upset that she ran out of mana while fighting the Demon Lord. Luckily for her, she was found by the Demon Lord's former right-hand man, and he proceeded to rescue her from the cold hard floor by chaining her to his dungeon and slowly torturing her to death. And the last words that he told her, if she was ever to come back as a saint, he was gonna hunt her down and kill her again. It's one of those generic everything gets handed down to the main character kind of stories. C tier, it's your average isekai story with a new coat of red paint. If depression could take the form of a manga, this would be it. Isekai Health Kitchen is what you get when you combine the worst qualities of Shingeki no Soma and the isekai genre. The only thing interesting about this manga is that Isekai Health Kitchen is trying to do what Dumbbell did but it lacks the nuance that Dumbbell has, and will ever have. Proceeding to fail miserably while Dumbbell was entertaining thanks to its lovable cast, shenanigans, and their entertaining personalities, and how it teaches you the tips and tricks of working out. For example, you can't do a squat without tearing your asshole apart unless you properly warm yourself up with low intensity workouts. Well, enough of my thoughts, let's get into a summary. A bland dietary worker brings his little sister to another world with him, and both begin helping a brother-sister duo run a restaurant. That's it. There's some nice stuff that the manga has. It has a pretty interesting gimmick by taking the time to point out the little facts about cooking food. That the way that you cook food in a certain way can either improve or even change the flavor, the texture, you know. For example, if you want to get a richer, smoky coffee, you just have to grind the coffee beans into a powder, then boil the coffee powder at around 100 degrees and add your dirty underwear at room temperature to get the most aroma out of the whole exchange. Aside from those tips, it's interesting and repetitive. It's just repeating the same events over and over again. It's hard to be captivated by the story even when the author doesn't seem to care about it. It's a nothing story, nothing really happens, it's just bland. It throws out food facts once in a while, but it doesn't build to anything meaningful. D tier. The only reason why I put it up so high is because I found some use for it. If you suffer from insomnia, I highly suggest you give this one a read. Imagine coming out of a cave and seeing a prehistoric tiger and thinking, yeah, I wouldn't throw hands with that. Mori Kuju is the author that never disappoints. Made many great mangas like Hololin and a manga about high schoolers realistically duking it out in the streets of Japan. Or Self-Deletion Island, a manga where people who try to end it all are sent. And must find a way to survive, not only the elements but each other. He brings you another banger, Taiga of Genesis. It is one of the best isekai I read all year long. A story about a young man who spirals into depression after his girlfriend decides she doesn't want anything to do with him. Well, the story begins with a protagonist going to a cultural expedition with his classmates when suddenly there is an unexpected earthquake. When the cave that they were just in collapses and have to escape using a different tunnel, transporting them to the past where prehistoric animals dominate the world. And from then on, it's an exciting story about survival and the dangers that lurk in the past, from prehistoric animals to the humans, while dealing with their personal demons. It saddens me that this will never get an anime adaptation. In my opinion, I think his other two works are in a league of their own and haven't received an anime adaptation, so I'm not really holding out much hope. Well, anyways, S tier, all the way. I want you to imagine, there you are, working hard. When you notice that your neighbor, they seem slightly off. When suddenly they come up to you and start having a conversation. Time passes, you go your separate ways, when suddenly you begin to lose control of your body, and it begins to move and talk in a way that's foreign to you, almost as if you're not able to control it. You, who just had your whole body stolen, is being controlled like a marionette. Imagine going through something like that. Something so horrendous, watching your body do these actions while the only thing that you could do is scream, and even that nobody will hear it. Well, that would have been amazing, but we got none of that. Instead, a nameless scientist ends up getting drafted when he messes up cooking up a virus in his makeshift meth lab. Well, for whatever reason, he was reincarnated as anime herpes. No name here can infect anything and control them. After he's done exploring their bodies, he can leave them and infect other bodies. And aren't you thinking, damn, that's cool, but won't the people that he takes over remember? Well, no, after he's done controlling them, they'll lose all prior memories to being possessed. He wakes up in the body of Takashi, and from then on he goes from body to body taking over people, until he meets his inevitable harem/love interest getting attacked by a wolf. He then lets himself get eaten and proceeds to take over the wolf's body. After a minor transformation, he becomes her pet dog. Takes her home, and instead of taking over her body and going to town to figure out what's going on, to plan out his next move, he instead leaves and infects a group of goblins. Interesting premise, but the writing is what keeps it down. The artwork is nice, it's like a bootleg version of Slime. And to sum it all up, no-name scientist got an isekai, he became herpes, and there was a part where he copied RE monsters. One day you suddenly collapse, so you pay the doctor a visit, only for him to tell you that you suffer from an incurable heart disease and have 3 years left to live. As you fall to your knees from the immense shock, the world that you know is coming to a premature end. What do? Do you call your parents, tell them what's happening? Or do you call the love of your life, put your affairs in order? No? So then what do? Oh, I quit my job and stay home playing games. My god, what kind of psychopath are you to write something like this? And then it continues to do everything that a bad isekai does. Our story begins with a protagonist waking up only to get discriminated by his own parents because he has black hair. The manga doesn't properly begin until he reaches the age where he becomes a man. 14. His brother gives him money to leave on a journey and become his own person. Joins a guild where he has to pass the exam to become a member, meets an examiner who doesn't want to pass him, only for the main character to overwhelmingly defeat the professional examiner. Mind you, he has tested hundreds of adventurers, but in all the 50 years of training the next generation, not once has he ever suffered a loss like that. Same generic isekai tropes. D tier. I can see the appeal, but there's better options out there. After countless decades of reading mangas, I've finally done it. I found it. The perfect manga, no, the perfect isekai. This manga has everything that you could ever want, neatly compressed into a massive pile of shit, and wow, is it one of the most generic ones that I've read all year long. The mangaka jam-packed his story filled with every single generic trope that currently exists. Number 1, introduce the main protagonist's love interest about to be ganged up and receive bad touch. Number 2, the main character is the strongest living creature and he creates and uses bullshit spells. For example, he made a reincarnation spell, so he can reincarnate himself 1,000 years into the future in order to fight someone strong. Even the artwork looks like it was made in some kind of sweatshop that pays the artist in peanuts. It looks more like a spoof or a parody than a well-respected manga, but there's not even the minute amount of effort put into it to make it entertaining. Tell me I'm not looking too deeply into the reason why he reincarnated himself. He was bored in his current time period because no one was stronger than him, so he decides to reincarnate himself in the future where magic is already declined? Tell me, what's the point of the series? It's by far one of the worst power fantasy isekais that I've read all year long. F tier. No, wait, this is so bad it can't even be placed in F tier. Studio at G tier. Okay, just like a surgeon, I'll cut to the fat and get to the point. And say, This Village is a Sim is an S tier manga. At first I thought it was bland and generic. That was until the author changed the approach to the whole isekai thing. I'll give a minute spoiler. He doesn't go on a date with Truck-kun or teleport to another world. He just ends up being in need at home when suddenly he gets a video game disc, and when he puts it in, he begins viewing a group of settlers leaving their hometown. That a group of monsters broke in and they had to make a daring escape. But most of the story revolves around our lovable main character Yoshio. He's such a likable character. He's a NEET that spends most of his time in his room. But it's not like he wants to spend his days in a room. I don't want to spoil it, but he comes across an obstacle that will put most people's mental health in disarray too. And the thing that makes this isekai so wonderful is that the focus is not on the fantasy world and the magic, but instead on the mundane man who's forced to play God, while slowly but surely trying to get the pieces of his life in order. Just a minuscule progression that the main character does and how it brings a positive impact on him, and in turn making the burden that those around him carry lighter just brings a smile to my face. It just makes me excited to read the next chapter. The more I read the series, the more I fell in love with it. Everyone just grew on me, and I hope to make a proper video on this in the future. Again, solid ass tier. Our protagonist is a simple salaryman who ends up getting transferred by his company to another side of the country, just to end up getting hit by a granny on the scooter and ends up being summoned by the demon lord in order to create an army. If you're looking for a manga that has a protagonist that could turn his enemies into dust by clapping his right ass cheek, then I'm sorry this manga is not for you. It's mostly about a protagonist trying to figure out and deal with the situation at hand without using any kind of cheat ability. Well, it's not like he can, even if he wanted to. It's a comedy manga where the main character has more than 2 working brain cells at any given time. He behaves like an actual adult. Then, when childish things are thrown at him, he just deals with it like an actual adult. For example, later the Orc chief's daughter goes up to him and tells him there's only one way to form an alliance. He has to marry her. But instead he does the sensible thing and just negotiates better with her father in order to join the army. It has such a unique twist on the genre that I can't get enough of it. I highly recommend it. If you have 10 minutes to kill, please give this one a read. Our protagonist is Oroku, is the son of a female knight in the north. Due to his appearance taken more after his mother, he was harassed and bullied by the other orcs in his village. After meeting a beautiful elf and other demi-human girls and being rejected for his lineage, the strength of his blood awakens and the plot begins. With newfound determination, he forms a plan to become the strongest warrior in history in order to make a harem of beautiful women. Okay, I have some questions. First, how did his mom take that orc package without becoming a chalk outline? He's built like a 2-story building and she's shaped like a stick figure with boobs. Second, he got reincarnated and he doesn't know that there's other women and that there are equivalent female versions of each male race. Stupid would be an understatement for a main character. He's reincarnated and has his memories of his past life. He knows the fact that he was reincarnated, but he still acts like a toddler. There's a line that I just can't forget. "You're the reason why they bully me, mom, cause I'm not like the other orcs." Seriously? That's a really stupid kind of mindset to have for a reincarnated person. He basically acts like a child. Really stupid, and most of all, he uses his previous life common sense and applies it in this world, but doesn't use his experience to get ahead in this new world. It's so stupid. What's the point of having a protagonist come from another world if he's not going to use the knowledge that he gained there here? Also, it's a fantasy world with many fantasy races living alongside each other. We were shown a multitude of other girls. Why? And I mean, why is the only girl that's ever shown in these crappy isekai harems an animal girl, human royalty, and a damn elf? Where is the variation? Where's the quality monster girls? Where's the Doulahans or the demon girls? To anything but a damn elf? I'm so tired of these goddamn elf. Give me a proper monster girl. D tier. Let me tell you about Jack of all trade and master of none. The title alone gives you a hint of what you're getting throughout the entirety of the manga. It has every single trope that every other isekai story uses, and it doesn't excel at any of them. There's nothing to make it stand out other than the fact that he can do everything. Reading this manga felt more like watching a mangaka go through bullet points instead of building a well thought out world. One rainy night, a thief comes into the convenience store that Asagi works in and decided to use his chest as a knife sharpener. Little did the poor man robbing the store not get his knife sharpened, but he also got dirty with the convenience store's workers' blood, and then is immediately reincarnated into the middle of a forest. That's such a random place to be reincarnated. Why didn't they just drop him off in the middle of a pitch black cave while they're at it? But you have to hand it to the author. He doesn't waste any time. In just a matter of 2 pages, he finds a goblin, gets a stick, sharpens the stick, kills the goblin, gets hunted by a wolf, manages to outrun the wolf, finds a town, meets the guard. The guard doesn't want to let him in without showing him any ID. I would have called that an inconvenience, but it wasn't even that. In the same 2 pages, the guard looks at his axe and sees the blood dripping down from it and goes, "Alright, you seem like a perfectly well-rounded individual. Well, you're welcome to come into our small town and murder us all in our sleep." From then on, he goes to an inn, sleeps, and he does what every other isekai story does. Goes to the guild, registers, and does some menial task. Meets his potential harem love interest, and I'll give it some credit, they end up in jail. It's like reading every isekai story that has ever come out, but stuffed into a mediocre manga. C tier. What if you were walking home from work one night when suddenly a hole opened up underneath you, sending you to another plane of existence? And the next thing you see is a girl with a teddy bear calling herself God, explaining that you fell down a dimensional rift and died, but luckily for you, she's gonna reincarnate you in another world. The story begins with the protagonist Toru falling into a magical puddle being sent to the body of a boy who was bleeding to death. Or should I say he was already dead and he took over the body. Upon waking up, he's flooded with the memories of the young boy who he body snatched, and finds out that a group of villagers threw him off a cliff. And the puddle of blood that he was just lying on attracted a giant caterpillar. What does he do? Try hiding? Find a way to escape? No. He whips out a spooky katana from his hidden pocket and masterfully cuts a pillbug in one slash. He's never used a sword in his life, and he's just been tossed into a new body, but somehow he's able to master it. He manages to escape the cave that they threw him in, and when he arrives at the town, he's viewed as the second coming of the Antichrist. People start running, tripping over each other. Hell, I even saw one jump into a well in order to escape the sight of his demonic black hair. The only person brave enough to confront him was an old lady who was just about to cross over to the other side herself. And I'll give the author some credit. There's one page with no dialogue where he's able to let us the reader figure out what has happened to his family. And stuff like that always puts a smile on my face when they don't have to over-explain everything. They let us figure things out on our own. He's exploring his home, going through his belongings when his head is faithfully reunited with his past love, The Rock. They were separated for a bit, but thank God they got to meet each other again. He was kidnapped yet again and was brought back to the cave that he just escaped. Then they proceeded to monologue that they killed his family because they had black hair and somehow black hair caused a drought. He gets angry and scares them off into a cave filled with giant caterpillars that proceed to eat them. Accidentally. So it's not murder. Well, not intentionally. And you know, it just jumps into the deep end of typical isekai tropes. You know, the ones we're familiar with. He joins a guild, gets bullied for being different, being mocked because he looks different, then having to prove that he's really overpowered and building a harem around him. Not good, not bad, just your average typical isekai story. There are things that make sense, such as the Adventurers Guild not wanting to let him join because he's a reincarnate, and they can never level up. Makes it more believable, but yeah, C tier. There's not a better fitting name than Failure Frame. There's nothing more of a failure than this isekai. It begins with our main protagonist being teleported by a goddess to another world, with a group of his classmates leaving him with a bunch of terrible skills, which like in every other isekai turns out not to be terrible. Having the ability to paralyze, poison, and Bill Cosby an enemy to death. Due to his skill being so, quote unquote, unsightly, the goddess that summoned him is now trying to end his life and teleports him deep into the cave filled with powerful monsters. I'll give the protagonist some points. He doesn't whine and complain every 30 seconds if things aren't going his way. He's like a less angry version of Naofumi. He just grits his teeth and tries to get through the situation. But it's your typical revenge story. With the predictable tropes, he gets an overpowered elf lover in a world filled with video game-like elements, with an ability that's useless at first glance, but is secretly overpowered, and standard self-interest-like personality. It goes in and out without you realizing it, and just like an unwanted pregnancy, this manga does not deliver. D tier. I've always wondered if Japanese authors skied in their free time. And luckily for us, I found a mangaka that answered that question. And the answer is... yeah, apparently they do. In my long time of reading isekai, I have never seen a manga that gives me a warm feeling in my stomach. Necessarily speaking, I wouldn't say it's a good feeling, but for certainly the one thing I could say about this manga is that it's not slow. This manga proceeds to move the plot at a breakneck speed. Page 1 goes from his previous life defeating a monster and getting the extendo staff, to him dying and being reincarnated in another world. He had a bunch of items stored in a pocket that mentioned, and when he died, they came along with him too. By chapter 3, he's already killed one of the most powerful monsters by flying in front of him and poking him to death. Getting recommended to an elite school, and his main goal is to prove to the world that monster tamers are the best class out there. I would love to say that this was painful to read, but I don't remember anything about it, other than the fact that he just poked the monster to death and went to a school in another world. Solid F tier. Shinkai no Mi. I'll cut to the chase. F tier. No, Studio IG tier. This manga's terrible. Uncle from Another World might be one of the funniest isekai mangas out there. I already made a video on it that goes into slightly more detail there, so check it out when you have the time. Or if I got you slightly interested in it, it has to be one of the most refreshing stories I've read in quite a while. And it flawlessly subverts tropes again and again. The story begins with the nephew of the main character going to the hospital to unplug his uncle from life support, because his family has gone into crushing debt and can no longer afford to keep him alive. When he wakes up and explains to his nephew that he's actually been in another world for the past 17 years of his life, most of the jokes come from the uncle unable to read the situation at hand. Easy S tier. If there's at least one manga that you have to read, I highly recommend this one. To those wondering, hey Angel's Error, I'm not stupid. I see some mangas down there. At the bottom, where are they? And to that I have to say, like an unwanted foreskin, I had to cut it out and save it for another time. If not, this video was not going to come out for another decade. I didn't realize how hard it was going to be to edit manga, so yeah. Hey, thanks for watching the video, and if you enjoyed watching the video, leave a like, comment, subscribe, you know the usual spiel. Well, I've been God's Favorite Mistake, and I'm out.